Hi, and welcome to another edition of Side 2 Music Program, formerly a podcast with my friend Brian Barber, who's not here. Um, but I am here, your host Ethan, and this is the music show that we try to look at all things in the rock genre. Um, I brought you the most important 20 albums recently, and for today's show, I thought I'd do something. I'm going to be doing a lot of ranking shows, ranking albums by different artists, and I thought that this band certainly deserves the first ranking show that I will do. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent record purchases I've added to my collection, as well as some recent concerts that I've been to. First, I'll talk about the shows. You'll see here that I'm wearing a Weed Eater shirt. I saw these guys in Asheville at the One Stop. This was probably in August, late summer, so it's been a couple of months now. I've been wanting to see these guys for a long time. They're out of Wilmington, North Carolina, and they're a trio. Really, really heavy, bassy stoner metal. Some people call it sludge metal. It's kind of somewhere in between. They're not quite as bassy and heavy as Sleep, the band Sleep, but they're a little bit more on the guitar side and less on the bass side, and less distortion and noise and effects. But amazing show. I was not disappointed. Been wanting to see them for a long time, and of course this is from their wonderful album, God Luck and Good Speed, with that fist holding the cross album cover. Um, they were actually out of my size of t-shirts at the show, but I did order this one a little bit later. Also saw these guys last weekend, um, and that is Gojira. And this is the t-shirt I purchased at the show. They played at the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium here in Asheville, North Carolina, and very interesting band. They're a French metal band, four-piece, really, really heavy, but also kind of, they have some almost experimental aspects to their sound as well, some atmospherics and almost like some chanting kind of stuff that a lot of the metal bands like to do these days. A band called Knocked Loose opened up for them, and Knocked Loose were pretty good. I didn't get to see their entire set, but they were a little bit more on the screaming side. It was grindcore kind of stuff, um, and Alien Weaponry was the other band that opened up for them. Alien Weaponry I'm not as familiar with, and they have a really cool artwork on their album covers and their t-shirts. So I liked Knocked Loose a little bit better, but got to see Gojira. Gojira were amazing. So their drummer Mario is just a phenomenal musician to witness. If you ever get a chance to see them, please do. Their light show and the fog machines and everything, a total experience all the way around. And they're just really nice guys. After the show, they came out on stage and were just kind of talking to the audience, which is kind of unusual for a rock band to do. So that was the most recent performance I got to see live. It's nice to be able to get out and see shows again. And let's see, they're coming up. Driving and Crying are playing, and a band, kind of relatively new band called Sheer Mag, which I really love. They're fronted by a female lead singer, and they kind of do sort of like a mix of it kind of reminds you of 70s kind of stoner rock, 70s hard rock, like just good feeling hard rock though, not, more in the vein of like Bad Company, Thin Lizzy, stuff like that. I got to see them at the Grey Eagle. At the Mothlight in Asheville, right before COVID, the year before COVID hit, so 2019. They played there and they put on a really good show. And so a couple of new additions to my collection. Um, this one I have been wanting for a long, long time. This was a band, probably one of the heaviest American rock bands of all time. When you really think about like that early 70s classic rock, early heavy metal, early hard rock, these guys were right in the thick of that. Tim Bogert on bass, Carmen Appice on drums, Rusty Day on vocals and harp, and Jim McCarty on guitar. I'm talking about the legendary Cactus. This is their debut album. I've been wanting this for a long, long time. This is just like a chunk of heavy, good rock, American rock music. Not quite heavy metal, but pretty close. And, just to hear the drumming from Carmen Appice is phenomenal. Of course, Carmen Appice and Tim Bogert would then go on to play with Jeff Beck in a supergroup shortly thereafter the first couple of Cactus albums. And, Carmen Appice has played with everyone from Rod Stewart to Blue Murder, just all kinds of bands. Also got this one, speaking of the heavy rock genre. This is more the strictly heavy metal. Judas Priest's 1982 album, Screaming for Vengeance. I had to have this in my collection. A lot of people disagree with me. A lot of Priest fans, a lot of metal fans. This is by far my favorite Judas Priest. There's others that are up there. Point of Entry I like a lot. But this is the one that when you think 1982, Metallica and thrash hadn't come out yet. Some of the heavy doom metal had not really started yet. And these guys were about the heaviest thing around in the late 70s and early 80s, along with a couple of other bands like Venom and Motorhead. But this is like strictly heavy metal. It doesn't get any more metal than this, in my opinion. And Rob Halford's vocals are just, insane. So I'm glad to get that one on vinyl. This is an interesting band. This is from a little bit earlier. Kind of hard to peg this band and what category to put them in. It's Head Rings Out by Bloodwind Pig. Bloodwind Pig they were British, late 60s, on into the 70s, but they were definitely in the kind of early prog genre. A little difficult to peg these guys. They have a lot of jazz elements in there. There's a saxophone player, I believe, or a clarinet, but also a lot of heavy rock. Kind of makes you think of Jethro Tull a bit, but definitely not quite as hard rock. I would say they're more jazzy rock, but definitely more in the rock vein. Not jazz rock in the way that you might think of like Traffic or Steely Dan. These guys are definitely rock first, jazz second, but really good purchase. I got this on Discogs, and it's hard to describe the music. You just have to hear them. But they're definitely one of those bands. You put it on, you're like, you can't quite figure out what genre they are and what they're doing, but you just can't stop listening. It's that kind of sound, kind of similar to some bands that I've liked over the years, where it's like, I don't know what this is, but I can't stop listening to it, and whatever it is, it's working for me. And let's see, of course, probably my favorite rock band of all time. This is actually not an official release by them. This is a collection of singles and songs that were not included on any of their original 4 albums. But this is Velvet Underground VU, which was actually released in 1984, long after the band had broken up. But it's got some great songs on it. I Can't Stand It, Stephanie Says, Lisa Says, Foggy Notion, Ocean, which would later be re-recorded on Lou Reed's first solo album. Those are just some of the most solid Velvet Underground songs, and they're always included on their greatest hits and best of collections. And they actually came from this record. There's a cool photo of the band, probably the most famous photo of the band ever taken. I don't know about 1984, because Velvet Underground were still pretty unknown in 84 to most of the music public. And I had to add this to my collection. Just simply one of the most perfect debut albums um, ever released, and from a band that was very pioneering. Kind of unleashed a whole new style of playing, kind of somewhere between metal and rock, hard rock, and that's the debut album from Van Halen. Perfect, almost perfect album. I mean, one of the best debuts. Came out in 1978, produced by Ted Templeman. Um, you've got You Really Got Me, Jamie's Crying, Running with the Devil, and talking about love, um, Eruption, Ice Cream Man. All of those songs are the kind of the hits, the ones that we all have heard on the radio, classic rock radio, hard rock radio over the years. But it also has songs like On Fire, which is killer. I'm the One, Little Dreamer, and Atomic Punk. I mean, come on. It is, and then you get the iconic photo of David Lee Roth doing the back bend on the back. But Van Halen, first album. Gotta have that one. All right, so now for the matter at hand. This is my first ranking show, so I'm going to be doing a lot of bands, a lot of artists, where I'm going to rank their albums, according from my least favorite to my favorite. And these aren't necessarily in order based on the least quality to the best quality. These are just my personal favorites, the ones that I think. And I have various reasons. They're not just because I like the albums. They're also because I think what the albums meant at the time and kind of what they did musically and how cohesive they are. I think that's really important too. And how do they work as a single album? And the band that I chose for my first ranking show is the Beatles. I think that's totally apropos, considering they are considered the greatest rock band of all time, and for good reason. Not only were they master songwriters, hugely successful, popular. We all know about the Beatles and their influence in the rock genre, and their influence on pop music too. I mean, their songs have been covered by countless artists, and almost every member of the band was a pretty strong songwriter, but especially Lennon and McCartney. That combination of their songwriting abilities was just unmatchable. So let's get started. I'm going to be, and remember, these are in my favorites, least favorite to favorite. I love all these albums. I think there's great songs on every Beatles album. I mean, it goes without saying. But, and then many may disagree with me. There's a lot of people that are going to see this list and think, I would never choose that as my number 5 or number 10 or whatever. But it is what it is, and I have various reasons for why I rank them this way. So let's get started. I would say my first. Oh, and I've got a couple honorable mentions, believe it or not, that are not actual official releases, but important to mention at the end. Okay, so my first choice, I guess, least favorite album is going to come as a surprise, just considering that, I think its importance as an album and when it was released is unquestionable, undeniable. But as an album, as a cohesive, full album, I just feel like it lacks the songwriting of later albums, and in the UK, and I've got the UK versions, by the way. I don't have the American versions. The American versions were totally different album covers, different titles. There were actually more releases in the United States, and they had the song order was changed around and stuff. But most people consider the British releases on Parlophone Records to be the official releases. And so let's get started with this one. This is my first choice, and it is with the Beatles. And this would be called Meet the Beatles in the United States. And this was their debut album in the United States. In England, this is actually their second album. I'll be doing their debut album in a little bit. But, I feel like there's a couple strong tracks on this. It Won't Be Long is a great opening track. Not only is it a great song, but it's a great opener. It's kind of sort of like the kickoff, kind of symbolic in its lyrics of the Beatles' success. And All My Loving, great song. In their version of The Miracles, You Really Gotta Hold On Me. Money is pretty good. A lot of good covers on this. The Beatles in their early days were just doing a lot of covers, and they couldn't play their instruments as well, obviously, kind of just starting out. And I feel like there's a lot of patchy aspects to these early albums. You know, there's some really strong tracks, but they're usually the hits. Like It Won't Be Long, All My Loving. Everybody knows those songs, right? And those are kind of some of my favorites. But this is definitely one that I don't listen to often, and the production is a little bit, I don't know, there's not much there, right? Even George Martin was kind of just getting started working with a rock band. He'd been doing classical music and jazz and other things, and he didn't really know kind of what to do with a four-piece rock band. So he was learning as the Beatles were learning, and you kind of got to see and hear them grow together. But anyway, with the Beatles, that would be my least favorite. Next up would be this one. I believe this was their third release, Beatles for Sale. Again, kind of the same thing. Some strong tracks on here. I'm a Loser is great. Babies in Black's good song. I'll Follow the Sun, one of the best Beatles songs. 8 Days a Week is good. But I just feel like other than that, you got a lot of filler on this. You know, you got stuff like I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, What You're Doing, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, No Reply, Mr. Moonlight. You know, just a lot of songs that you just don't typically think of when you think of classic Beatles songs. And I never want to listen to. You know, there's never a time when I'm like, you know, I really want to hear that song, Mr. Moonlight. You know, it's just not. However, I would put this album on for I'm a Loser and I'll Follow the Sun and 8 Days a Week, those three songs. Okay. And kind of in the same era, we're still going in the same era. This is their debut in England, Please Please Me. Very obvious, you know, when they first started out, they were very young, very inexperienced, and their playing was, you know, there's the infamous story that they would pick up, you know, a G string or an E string and put it on as the A string, and they just would tune it. Put banjo strings on guitars, a lot of things like that. You know, I Saw Her Standing There, can't go wrong, great album opener. Love Me Do, it's a great song. You know, again, the hits. Do You Want to Know Secrets? Okay. But those are like kind of the biggest hits, and they're the best songs on the album. Everything else is just filler. A lot of covers, a lot of R&B stuff. The Please Please Me title track is also really good on this. Right. Up next, this is going to be kind of a controversial pick because most people consider this. This is, in a lot of lists, is actually ranked their best album by a lot of people. And while it does have one of my favorite Beatles songs of all time on it, it's just as an album, I just find some of the songs just kind of drag, and it's not, and it just doesn't, it's not something that I want to come back to over and over again. And I'm talking about their 1965 release, Rubber Soul. Definitely a breakthrough, groundbreaking album. Very influential. They were kind of, this was the moving into the psychedelic era, and they're also experimenting with more diverse sounds, bringing in country music and songs like What Goes On. A lot more piano being introduced, like Drive My Car, which is a great song. Norwegian Wood is introducing folk and Indian music, the sitar. That's one of my all-time favorite Beatles songs, and that's on this. You Won't See Me is good. Nowhere Man, everybody knows. Michelle. If I Needed Someone, Nowhere Man, I already said that. You know, kind of got some funky aspects on it too, like The Word. They were kind of using some kind of like, you know, it was definitely their kind of beatnik-y, kind of moving into the, I don't know, incense burning, you know, sitar playing days with this one. But over time, I think the production definitely improved. You know, George Martin's production on this is, you know, impeccable. But as far as the songwriting, not one of my favorite albums. These next two, I always consider they go together. They were released back to back, and they're really similar in vein. So it was hard to choose. These could be interchangeable for sure. But next up, I would say Hard Day's Night, 1964. Um, title track, I Should Have Known Better. And I Love Her, Tell Me Why, Can't Buy Me Love. Things We Said Today. It's a great album cut. It doesn't get a lot of airplay, but is one of my favorite Beatles songs, Things We Said Today. Really starting to get more experimental with their melodies and their songwriting. After those first 3 or 4 albums, this is when they really started to kind of come into their own and get more creative. And the production was starting to increase too. We were starting to hear more studio tricks kind of working in. But yeah, this album, very interchangeable with my next one, which is Help. Also from 1960. No, this was actually released after 65. This was the same year as Rubber Soul, believe it or not. Like this one a little bit more, just because I feel like, again, we're moving more in the direction of the more sophisticated songwriting with songs like Help. The Night Before, great melody. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, another one of my all-time favorite John Lennon songs. You're Gonna Lose That Girl. Ticket to Ride. I've Just Seen a Face, and then, Yesterday, Paul McCartney's Yesterday. How can you go wrong? This is a more cohesive album too. They're starting to kind of understand the concept of like making an album that is cohesive from song 1 all the way to the end, which they weren't doing on their first couple of albums very much. They had like some 3 or 4 strong hits, really strong songwriting, and then a bunch of covers and filler just to make an album. That's kind of the way I think of those first 3 albums. And then with these 2, for sure, the songwriting starts getting more complex. You start getting more themes, different kind of lyrics, different instruments, and the production. George Martin's production definitely getting better. This was right towards the time when they stopped touring too, so they were able to focus a little bit more in the studio. All right, the next choice is technically a soundtrack. Yellow Submarine. Side 1 of this is actual material that they recorded around the time they were kind of. A lot of these songs were recorded right before Sgt. Pepper, in that same kind of era of recording, but didn't make it on the Sgt. Pepper album. Somewhere between Rubber Soul or Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. The second side, what used to be a side when it was a record, is just classical music that was kind of orchestrated by George Martin and was just background music in the animated film Yellow Submarine. The first side, the Beatles stuff, is really good stuff. I like it, some of my favorite stuff. However, as a full album, it's just a little lopsided. It was clearly something that the record company put out, to cash in on Beatlemania and just, keep the ball rolling. But it's got, of course, the title track, Yellow Submarine, great Ringo Starr vocal. Only a Northern Song, and It's All Too Much. Great George Harrison. This is when George Harrison really started coming into his own and showing that he could write these like quasi-psychedelic, very innovative guitar work, using distortion and stuff and open string tuning, open string playing, and I really like that. All Together Now, kind of a novelty. Hey Bulldogs, I really like dirgy, kind of dark John Lennon tongue-in-cheek thing. And then you got All You Need Is Love, which was like the big hit off this. But yeah, side 1, really good stuff that I always kind of come back to. Never really listen to the side 2, which is just the instrumental stuff, kind of symphonic stuff. The next one is kind of similar in vein and era. These were basically all outtakes from the Sgt. Pepper album, and that's Magical Mystery Tour. There was an accompanying movie that went with this as well, kind of this trippy, psychedelic, nonsensical movie, just a lot of images. I remember as a child just being enamored by my parents' vinyl copy of this and looking at there was a giant fold-out photos from the film, and being very, taken aback. As a child, it just was so strange. They were a very strange group at this time. But this has some strong material on it. Magical Mystery Tour, the song, Fool on the Hill, I Am the Walrus. I mean, come on. But then it has songs like Hello Goodbye and Penny Lane, which are these kind of happy, upbeat pop songs that Paul McCartney wrote. Huge hits. These were also songs that were released as singles and were like big #1 hits. Strawberry Fields Forever is a great song. Baby You're a Rich Man. And All You Need Is Love is also on this as well. So this was sort of like outtakes from Sgt. Pepper, 1967, same year. And outtakes and then singles that were recorded in the same sessions as Sgt. Pepper, but didn't make it on the album. And there you go. So Magical Mystery Tour, some good stuff on that. I like that one a lot. This was technically, depending on how you look at it, the very last release of Beatles material, current Beatles material, even though the band had already broken up. It wasn't technically their last together as a group, but it was posthumous. And it's Let It Be from 1970. In time, I've grown to really like this album a lot more. This album was one of those that was, when most people think of this album, they have sometimes some bad connotations with it because it really symbolized the end. This was the end of the group, and a lot of people, that saddened a lot of people, and there was fighting going on with the group, and it kind of ended in an ugly way. But the material on here is really good, considering what they were going through at the time. Not getting along, especially John and Paul. Cutting songs like Two of Us, which just sounds like they're the best of friends, right? It's kind of almost like an Everly Brothers kind of thing. Dig a Pony, great John Lennon song. Across the Universe, of course, most people know. I'm not as much of a fan of that song. I think that one's a little overrated. Then you got songs like I Be Mine, Dig It, Let It Be, can't go wrong. And then you've got, the big songs like Get Back, closing out, great closer. A bluesy song, For You Blue, George Harrison. And I love I've Got a Feeling, the Paul McCartney song. And you got some kind of throwaway stuff like Maggie May, which is like pub drinking song kind of thing, and The Long and Winding Road, which is a sappy ballad. I've never been a fan of that song, but Dig a Pony, Two of Us, Let It Be, Get Back, and I've Got a Feeling. Those are great songs on that. And it kind of has this kind of like earthy, hippie quality to it. It's kind of like the Beatles, just really kind of almost like a down home sound, All right, so my next choice, and I actually have 2 copies of this. While I like some of the material better on Let It Be, as a complete album, and I have the CD and the vinyl there, Abbey Road, many consider this their finest album. I've never agreed with that. It's never, ever been my favorite album by them. But again, in time, just like with Let It Be, I've grown to really appreciate this album. I think that this was one of the earthiest, kind of most soulful albums they ever did, with songs like Come Together, I Want You, She's So Heavy, and then that whole side 2 thing where it starts out really like, pretty song, Here Comes the Sun, and it goes into some creepy psychedelic and then this long string of songs, 8 or so songs that all kind of string together the whole You Never Give Me My Money, Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight at the End, which are really all one song. They were bits and pieces of songs, clearly, that the Beatles hadn't worked out, so they just kind of stuck them all together. That's kind of a cool way to end the album, I think. People at the time may have thought that this was just a throwaway, that the Beatles were breaking up, so they just didn't bother to finish these songs. But I think it was pretty brilliant to, have this sort of song collage there at the end. Oh Darling, it's a great soulful number from Paul. Come Together, Something, Here Comes the Sun. You get Ringo's Octopus's Garden. Definitely my favorite tracks on this would be Come Together, Something, I Want You, Oh Darling, and then that You Never Give Me My Money thing at the end. Just great stuff, and the iconic there that's been reproduced a million times. All right, so now we're down to three releases that are typically, with the exception of Rubber Soul, which I've already talked about, are considered, usually in most lists, make the top three. And this was a hard decision because I'm also thinking about, again, cohesiveness. If you'd asked me to do this list 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I probably would have done this completely different. The number 2 and the number 3, my number 1's a no-brainer, but the number 2 and number 3, I had a little difficult time choosing. Third, I'm going to go Revolver. This is 1966, so this is between Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper, and this is when they're really delving into the psychedelic. I mean, you can see by the artwork, it's just, and they got the actual photographs of their eyes in there. It's just kind of getting creepy, psychedelic world, But songs like Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping. This actually has Yellow Submarine on it, too. She Said is one of the greatest Beatles songs. And then the total psychedelic rave up at the end, Tomorrow Never Knows, which is just this one note, weird song, a lot of backwards recordings. This is where they're really getting into studio tricks. You're really getting prepped for Sgt. Pepper and things to come with the experimental phase of the band. Rubber Soul, this one, and Sgt. Pepper, and then on into the Magical Mystery Tour, too. Got to Get You Into My Life. I Want to Tell You. I just think the songwriting on this is just really strong, and as an album works really well. The songs kind of flow together here, there, and everywhere. Good Day, Sunshine. They were really like hitting a gold mine with the songwriting on this. So my next choice for the number 2 and this are only, very close. I could have easily made this my number 2 just because as an album, I think it's more cohesive than the next one. And the next one is their self-titled or the White Album, and I have it on record and then on CD as well. I think the problem with this album, the only problem is that it could have easily been a single album, right? There's the famous photograph of the band inside. Not necessarily that there's filler on this, but I could just live without some of these songs. I don't need to hear Wild Honey Pie. I'm not even really that big of a fan of Bungalow Bill, to be honest with you. Let's see. They could have left that off. Sexy Sadie. It's okay. Revolution 1 and Revolution 9. Gotta go. We don't need that. Honey Pies. It's just silly. Cry Baby Cry. Good Night. Those are the kind of weaker tracks on this. But I think everything else is just solid. I mean, you've got Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Glass Onion, Obla Di Obla Da, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Happiness is a Warm Gun, Martha My Dear, I'm So Tired, Blackbird, Piggies, Rocky Raccoon, Don't Pass Me By, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, Helter Skelter, Long, 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 one of the greatest Beatles songs ever. Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, which is strange but awesome. And you got Savoy Truffle. I mean, again, you could have lost like 4 or 5 tracks on this, and that would have been fine. It would have been a perfect, single album. And really brilliant that they just released this white, this white cover. I think that the reason they did that was because it was kind of like Eric Clapton, reacting to Clapton as God. He wanted to shed that image. The Beatles wanted to shed an image too. They were just like blank white, and it's disappointing now when you see the White Album in stores. There's they've created a cover for it, right? With photographs of the Beatles and like a logo across, and that's just not the intention of the original album. I mean, yeah, this is just, it's iconic. My copy is a little beat up, as it should be. But, it just says Beatles right across there. No songs listed on the back, anything like that. Probably no surprise what my favorite and what I think is their most perfect album in every way too, right? Um, there's a CD copy. Um, Sergeant Pepper works on so many levels. It not only artistically was ahead of its time, it was the tricks they were doing in the studio. They were completely a full fledged studio band at this point. They created this image, this idea of the fictitious rock band, right? And they were really, Paul McCartney was really inspired by what was going on in San Francisco. Bands like Quicksilver Messenger Service and Big Brother and the Holding Company and Country Joe and the Fish, these bands with these long names, he thought that was really cool, so he did the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. And I mean, every single song is perfect on this, and they flow together so well. You got the title track at the beginning, goes right into With a Little Help from My Friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Getting Better All the Time, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Home, sort of kind of a down, melancholy ballad. Then it gets right back up with Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kryder, kind of a weird circus, freak show, psychedelic John Lennon song. Within You Without You is the George Harrison Indian song. When I'm 64 is kind of like an old show tune. Paul McCartney with the trombones. Lovely Rita, my all-time favorite Beatles song, which goes straight into Good Morning, which is John Lennon's kind of commentary on everyday British life. And then it go into the reprise of Sgt. Pepper, and then you end the album with A Day in the Life, which is just icing on the cake. It's perfect. It's a perfect. The artwork is really like colorful. It makes you think of like springtime flowers. It really fit in with that kind of earthiness that was coming. Kind of starting out of California, and the Beatles really tapped into that well, and took you on this kind of like their own psychedelic trip, if you will. This is an album that even people who don't like the Beatles, typically in this and the White Album, they will say, I like those albums. And then occasionally maybe your Abbey Road. But there you have it. Those are my ranked Beatles albums, all their albums, from worst to best, or at least favorite to favorite. Some honorable mentions are these two albums. Actually, these are not albums. These are collections that came out probably about 15, 20 years ago. They're the Beatles Past Masters Volume 1 and 2. Volume 1, it's got the original version of Love Me Do, or the single version. A lot of their songs in German, like She Loves You, which is Zelieb Diek, Long Tall Sally, Slow Down, Matchbox, I Feel Fine, She's a Woman, I'm Down. A lot of great stuff that was not on any of the official album releases. This Boy, She Loves You, a lot of singles on here. But yeah, and then the Volume 2 is their later period. So this has got Rain, Paperback Writer, We Can Work It Out, Day Tripper, Lady Madonna, Hey Jude, Don't Let Me Down, The Ballad of John and Yoko. None of these songs were on official releases. So these are must-haves if you want to have like a lot of the singles and you don't want to go out and find. I actually have a lot of the 45s of the kind of earlier stuff, which is cool to have, but if you want them all in one collection and you don't want to have like all these singles everywhere, this is some of the best stuff that they released as singles, because back then singles were such an important part of the music industry. And even though albums, the Beatles were one of the pioneering bands to bring album oriented rock into popular music, they were still a singles band, and they relied heavily on singles, and they had a lot of them and a lot of hits throughout their what's considered now a short career, right? They're only around for about 8 years, but at the time, that was considered a long time for a rock band, because there hadn't been a lot of rock artists. So anyway, that's my ranking of the Beatles albums. It will be interesting. It'll be cool to see what you all think. So please leave me your list or any comments or suggestions in the comments below. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.